Hey folks, this is Zach Snyder. I'm the head of advisory here at Red Pepper, and here we help a lot of different clients in a lot of different ways. We have some truly awesome folks that can help you implement the technology of Qualtrics, and we have some equally awesome folks that can help on the advisory side to help those more strategic needs that you might have. We help clients in a whole bunch of industries, but financial services and specifically banking is really near and dear to our hearts. And to help support that, we brought on Bruce Paul, one of our advisors, to help us kind of understand more about what's going on in the market today. So, Bruce, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. Yeah. Hi there. My name is Bruce Paul. I've been in the banking CX area for 2.5 decades now. My background is I used to run the global business for the Nielsen Company, all of the financial services research around the world in 55 different countries. So did millions and millions, tens of millions of interviews with bank customers. Also ran the customer experience advisory at some of the leading management consultancies, including Greenwich Associates. But probably most relevant for the bankers on this call is I actually founded the banking benchmarks. And that's, as you probably know, the largest banking benchmark. The benchmarks are the largest banking study in the world, covering hundreds of thousands of US customers every couple of months and covering thousands of banks. It covers the customer experience and brand tracking of each of those banks. And so therefore I've worked with the largest banks, from the trillionaire banks down to the single branch credit unions. So I have a lot of experience covering thousands of different institutions across the industry.
Amazing background. I can't wait to leverage some of your knowledge. Let's jump right into the crux. I know banks are really working hard to attract new customers. So, how does a good CX program help them do that?
Yeah. It's been a very quirky last few years, so up and down for the banking industry. Before the pandemic, through the pandemic, and then with the rate environment being what it is right now, it's been sort of the best of times and worst of times for banks. But right now, there's still a huge amount of business to be had. On average, there's about 11% of households will switch their primary bank every year in the United States. That went to zero at the beginning of the pandemic and then shot up well above that as we got out of the pandemic. That's a lot of business. There's millions and millions of households looking to switch banks right now. But it does vary a lot, and you really have to be conscious of your market. So in places like Southern California, South Florida, Metro Texas, the switching behavior is actually a bit higher than that, 11%. It's actually lower in some Midwest markets. So you really have to understand your particular market. I know a lot of people are focused on rates right now because there's a lot of banks that are really desperate to get a lot more deposits. And rate switching, although it's kind of winding down, there's still some rate switching out there. But that's kind of dying down a bit. And even though banks are still desperate, I've seen banks offer 6% on their deposits. Talked to a banker just a week ago who was offering 6%, and they were getting no business, even though they were offering 6%. They were in a very competitive market, and so what was happening is when somebody would say, "Oh, I'm going to move my money over to this bank and get 6%," the incumbent bank would match that. So even with these rates being relatively high, there's still not a lot of switching of the hot money because of the rates. So what is making people switch right now? Well, it's the same thing that's always been the leader of why people switch banks. It's my bank messed up. That's by far and has been for decades. That's why people switch banks. Very few people switch banks from saying, "Hey, I have a pretty good bank I'm happy with, but let me see if I can find a better one." No, people don't do that. Very rarely do they do that. Mostly it's my bank messed up. So it could be, the statement is wrong again this month. Or maybe they had a bad experience with one of your staff members. Somebody was rude to them. Maybe they had an issue or a problem and they never got a call back, even though they called several times. Or maybe they have an issue with the app or the mobile banking and they just can't find anybody to fix it. Something a straw that breaks the camel's back that finally convinces them to move. That's why they're switching. It's always a customer service. It's almost always a customer service issue like that. So when people are finally deciding to leave their bank, that's when they start thinking about a new bank. They don't think about new banks before that. Not until they're fed up with their new bank and they just say, that's it, I'm leaving. That is when they start to pay attention to advertising. That's when they start to think about what else they want. Do I want a large bank? Do I want a small bank? Do I want something in between? So it's your job to be in their consideration set as soon as they make that decision. So, and it's also your job to line up your values with what's making them switch. So if somebody is leaving their bank because they had the experience that nobody's ever calling me back, I had a problem, but they never respond. If right when they decide to leave the bank, they see one of your ads that says, hey, we're really responsive and we call you back. Well, guess what? You're going to be number one in their consideration set. Or if they had a problem, they thought that their previous bank or their current bank, that all of the staff were clueless about the app and the online tools, then it can never help me out. I have to figure out everything else myself. And, I'm really frustrated about that. Then as soon as they start looking and you have an ad or you have some social media around how competent your staff is around your technology, you're going to be number one in their consideration set. Or maybe they're frustrated by their current bank that, hey, they're nice, but they never help me out. I always have to come to them. Do you guys offer this? Oh, yeah, we offer that. Do you guys offer this? Yeah, we offer that. And they get really frustrated. Say, what am I paying my fees for? You're just basically smiling order takers. If they then turn around and see you advertise yourself as a bank that leans in and really helps people with their financial well-being, you're really going to be the number one bank that they might move to. So anyway, you really have to know your local market in order to get new business, and you have to know what the pain points are. If you focus on something that everybody else is good at, you're not going to get any business. But if you focus on where they're frustrated with the other banks in the area, that's where you're going to get your business. And let me, just to be clear about this, when you're trying to attract new customers, you should only promote something that you're actually good at. I've seen a number of banks say, "Oh, I know that everybody's frustrated with the digital technology in my area, so I'm going to say, hey, move to us because we got, if you're frustrated with their digital technology, move to us." But if we don't have good technology, they're just going to leave right away. So you really have to know not just what potential customers want, but you also have to know what you're good at. Who knows what you're good at? It's your own customers. So that's why it's important to do research amongst your own customers.
Yeah, I imagine so. And on the flip side, how do you know if any of your customers are frustrated enough to take their money and go elsewhere?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's sort of the eternal question within in banking about how you put together sort of predictive metrics. And it's hard. It's very hard because, as we know, nobody ever walks into a branch, cuts up their ATM card, and demands all their cash right there. Nobody does that. Maybe 100 years ago they did. But what happens now is when a customer is finally, frustrated enough, they get that straw that breaks the camel's back and decide to leave, they will slowly draw down their balances and slowly move their banking elsewhere. It's really hard to detect. You can't guess that if they decrease their balances by say 30%, that means they're leaving. It's really hard to detect. And that's because it's not that difficult. I mean, some people complain about it's difficult to change banks. It's actually not as difficult as people say because most households in this country have between 2 and 3 banking relationships. So they've already got a banking relationship. So it's relatively easy for them to start moving their money to other accounts. It's a hassle, but it's not starting from scratch for most banks. And if they have started moving their money to another bank, it's too late. There's not much you can do to save them unless that new bank screws up or isn't as good as they thought it would be. Then you might be able to save them. So that's why it's really crucial to conduct ongoing market research amongst your own customers and to hear not just what are you happy about, but what are you unhappy about? What are you unhappy about enough that might make you leave? Everybody will complain about fees and technology, but is that really enough to make you leave? So you have to focus on your own customers and understanding what would make them leave before they leave. If they're already out the door, it's almost impossible to save them. On the flip side, you also want to know how to attract the customers from your competitors, who are leaving that bank. And that's, you have to do the market research, the local market research, to collect those pain points. What are the pain points that are making them leave? And can you be the solution to that pain point? Do you have the service levels that, would help them to be more comfortable switching to you? And also, one other thing I should add is you also have to think about products that you're leading with, because at any one time, the research shows, and again, this is millions and millions of interviews, any one time, about 29%, give or take, of households are looking for a new banking product. And their current bank doesn't know about that. But they're looking for maybe a checking account or a new savings account or a CD or maybe a credit card or something like that. So if you lead with, hey, we're not only are we good at customer service, but we've got a great offer a new checking account, or we've got a fee-free savings account or something like that. So you can pair the two up about what we're good at, and here's a product to try us out. So that helps to attract new customers.
Now, what are you seeing in terms of movement between large banks and small banks? Are you seeing more people going from small to big to small? And for those smaller banks out there, what can they do once their customers start moving to those larger banks?
That's an important question right now, because there's been a lot of move from the smaller community banks to the larger trillionaire or super regional banks recently. A bit because of the Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank problems, a little bit of flight to what they think is safety. They're wrong about this, because the FDIC insures every bank deposit to $250,000 regardless of the bank. But there are some folks who are moving up to larger banks recently. So it's been a bit of a struggle for some of the community banks, and that's why there's a lot of competition on rates right now. That's a really important question right now, since there's a lot of market share that's been shifting actually from the smaller banks to the bigger banks. Recently, because of some trust levels, there was a number of, a certain percentage of people who felt that it was safer to go with the larger banks after the recent bank failures. Of course, they're wrong, because FDIC insures you no matter where you are, big bank or little bank, but that doesn't mean that people are always making rational choices. So there's been more pressure on the smaller banks to try to win back some of that business from the big banks. And ways to do that are to be a bit more rational about what makes you different. So some of the commonalities that I've seen from the smaller banks, a lot of smaller community banks are like to pride themselves on being really friendly and not pushy. And that's because they think, oh, the big banks are pushy and they're always trying to push product, and that's annoying. So we'll be the nice, friendly bank. And that's not necessarily the best idea, because it's not always as simple as that. From the surveys that I've seen in the banking benchmarks of the last half a dozen years, pushy is not always bad. So as a matter of fact, the very best banks, as reported by their own customers, actually are pushy. So you should be measuring and asking your customers, how pushy am I? But you also need to be asking, how proactive am I? Because you can be both at the same time. If you're just pushy without being proactive, that's bad. Proactive means you're leaning in and trying to help. And a lot of customers will say about a high-performing bank, yeah, they're pushy, but I understand they're just trying to help out, so that's good. I'm fine with that. They're genuinely trying to help me. Whereas if they emphasize on not being pushy, they can end up looking very passive. And that's actually a major driver of switching for customers in the United States, when they say, my bank isn't really helping me out. They're nice, but they're just happy order takers. They're not making my financial life better. I'll tell you a story about this, give you an example. So I was presenting the customer experience results at a mid-sized community bank in Massachusetts a couple years ago. And their scores showed that their customers said that they were not pushy at all, but also not proactive at all. Really nice people, but like zero, like really, really low proactivity. So I presented the results to the board and to the C-suite, and they were like, okay, I'm glad they think we're nice, but we really need to be solving their issues. And then after presenting those results, the head of retail had me go into a different conference room, a much bigger conference room that had a whole lot more people in it. It was all of their branch managers, head tellers, assistant managers, stuff like that, a few dozen people in the room. And I basically presented the same results again and said, hey, your customers think that you're nice, but they think you're really not very proactive. You're not helping them out. And they were angry. This room got angry. It was really uncomfortable for me. They said, this can't be right. We love our customers. Of course we're helping them out. Your data must be wrong. It was interviews with thousands of their customers, but they just rated them very non-proactive. And like I said, it was very uncomfortable for me because people were really pushing back and viscerally angry. They said, that's not right. We love our customers. Your data must be wrong. Your data must be wrong. And before the end of the meeting, a few of the people said, we're going to prove to you that you're wrong. And they left. And the head of retail closed the door after everybody left. And I was in shell shock. And she said, thank you, Bruce. That's exactly how I wanted that meeting to go. And I was shocked because I thought that was terrible. A very contentious meeting. And she said, no, Bruce. We have for years been trying to get our frontline staff to be more proactive and to try to cross-sell and lean in and help. But they're not. They just want to be nice. And they think, oh, that's too salesy. But it's great. Now they've got the fact that the customers themselves are saying, you're not helping me out. And that's exactly what they need to hear. And she said that the management had been telling them for years, but the frontline staff had been saying, oh, they've been pushing back and saying, no, we don't want to be pushy and we don't want to be salesy and stuff like that. But this was coming from the customer, so it was a very different perspective. So she was using that to change their behavior. And I tell you what, as contentious and as bad as that was, it was fantastic in retrospect because within the next wave or two of the data, their customers started to report a real difference in the staff behavior. Started to say they're much more proactive, and they started to cross-sell more, and they started to increase their business because the frontline staff understood that pushy and proactive is okay. It really changed the culture of the organization. So, I wish the head of retail had told me beforehand, so I wasn't so blindsided and had such an uncomfortable meeting. But hey, it all worked out in the end. So that's just one example about how a bank needs to understand their market, understand what they're good at, and that's a way for a community bank to start to compete against some of the other banks in their market. Let me give you another example. I was working with a community bank that really wanted to increase their market share in commercial banking. They had a pretty low market share. I think they were number 8 in their market. And they were basically losing out to all the big banks. All the big banks were the most successful. The Chase, Bank of America, Citizens, they're all very successful. And they were way behind at number 8. So what they did is they took a look at the local data to see what those banks were strong at and weak at in the commercial area. And it turns out there were 3 places that the bigger banks weren't performing well. They were not very responsive, they were not proactive, and their rates were not very good. And so this community bank was a fairly large community bank, let's say about 35, 40 million. 35, 40 billion. They said, okay, so that's what they're not good at. What are we good at? And they said, we know from our commercial customers, they tell us we're very responsive. So we know we can tell people that we're responsive. And we're also very proactive. So that's great. But our community bank or our commercial customers, they don't think our rates are that great. So they decided, okay, we know the weaknesses, the 3 weaknesses of all the big banks in the areas. And we know we're actually really good at 2 of those things, but not the others. So they didn't focus on rates. So they started running TV campaigns that just hammered home, we are responsive, we are proactive. We are responsive, we are proactive. If you need a bank that helps your business by being responsive and proactive, we're the ones. Responsive, proactive. They just hammered on that over and over again. And it worked. Within, I think, about 24 months, they had gone from the number 8 commercial lender in their area all the way to number 1. And that's because they understood the weaknesses of their competitors based on market research, and they understood their own strengths and places where they weren't strong, again, from their own market research. So that's an example of how a community bank used market research to really eat the lunch of the big banks.
Love that. Let's talk about something I see friction in the sales process constantly when trying to add new CX programs. A lot of times folks run up against tight budgets, and it's just a hurdle that people can't overcome as they try to either add a CX program or enhance what's already there. How can a bank use a CX program as a revenue generator rather than just being viewed as strictly a cost center?
So that's a really good question. A lot of banks struggle with the fact that they consider their customer experience program to be a cost center, as in something that can get cut when budgets are tight, and it's just something that the bank spends on or can choose not to spend on. But I love the fact that you're referring to it as a revenue generator, because a good customer experience program really can be a good revenue generator for the bank. It can completely change the dialogue around the program. So I have an example. I had a client that was a $35 billion community bank. And there was a merger in the market of two competitors. And they wanted to figure out if there was an opportunity for them. So what they did is they took some of the general market information that they collected to figure out what did the customers of those two merged banks think of the new merged bank, and what did they think of the client. And it turns out that it was a bigger bank buying a smaller bank. And that smaller bank, the customers there hated the big bank. From a customer perspective, it was a terrible merger. They had a really low opinion of the new bank, the new overlords. And so they were going to be leaving in droves. It was the worst bank possible to buy them. Oops. Obviously, they didn't do their market research beforehand. Whereas the client that I worked with said, okay, well, what did they think of me? Well, they happen to have quite a good opinion of that particular bank. So what that particular bank did is they spent a huge amount of money marketing in the area where this merger was happening to say, hey, if you're not happy with the new big bank, why don't you move to us? And they captured significant market share, I think like 26% market share within a couple of years. And this was in a very competitive, very affluent market. So they were able to take market research and turn it into dollars right away. Another example about how you can make your customer experience program a revenue generator was working with a bank, super regional bank, and they had just spent a lot of money redeveloping a lot of their technology. They did everything. They didn't do a core conversion, but they did just about everything else and spent I think upwards to $100 million in terms of redeveloping a lot of their managed services, their digital services, etc. And they were very proud of that. And they were about to launch an ad campaign to say, hey, we've got this great new technology. You should come to our bank. Luckily, right before they were about to launch that ad campaign, they saw the local data, the local competitive data, to see, what did people think of them? Why were people switching banks, etc. And it turned out that in their market, the digital services were not driving switching at all. As a matter of fact, it was the seventh leading reason people were switching banks. Obviously customer service tends to be number one, number two, but very few people in their market were switching banks because they were upset or frustrated with their technology, which was just in time because, as I said, they were about to launch a $35 million ad campaign, and that ad campaign would have been a complete waste of time because they would have said, hey, come to us because we've got great technology. Whereas everybody else would have said, I've already got good technology. That's not why I'm switching bank. And they would have ignored that ad campaign. So there's another example about how a customer experience program and market research, that led to a $35 million windfall, or they didn't waste that money just based on the research. So there's another example about how it can be a revenue.
Great. So let's talk about the types of questions that banks should and should not be asking as part of their customer experience measurement programs. Let's start with kind of the more interesting side. What are the wrong questions to ask?
Let's start at the highest level. Again, as I mentioned, I've worked with hundreds of banks and credit unions, from the very biggest to the smallest. And one of the things that you learn after doing this for a while is when you ask, what makes you different? Almost all of them say the same thing. They say, hey, Bruce, what really truly makes our institution different is our customer service. We have the best people. We have the best customer service. And they believe that. And then the next bank says, you know what makes us different? Our customer service. We have the best customer service. And again and again and again. I'd say at least 90% of banks believe that they have the best customer service. And that's what they think. They really think they're the best at customer service. And that's even if they do survey their own customers, because if they survey their own customers, they generally get pretty high scores on customer service. So does it make sense that it can be the unique strength for everybody? No. Could they all be right? No. So one of the things that I do when I speak at large conventions or conferences, banking conferences, is I have a little trick that I do if I'm in front of maybe 500 bank CEOs. I say, okay, everybody, raise your hand if you think that your customer service stinks. If it's below average, if it's no good. Raise your hand. Room full of 500 bank CEOs. Nobody ever raises their hand. Not once. So then I say, okay, so nobody's below average. How many of you think your customer service is mediocre? Just average, not good, not bad, just average. And generally about a few hands will go up. A few brave people will raise their hands. Never more than, say, 2 or 3%. So then I say, okay. So we've got 500 banks represented in this room. 0% of you are below average. 2% of you are average. 98% of everybody is above average. Does that make sense to everybody? And it's good because that sort of gets people thinking, can we all be above average? Is this like Lake Wobegon?
So does that mean that we shouldn't even ask customers to rate customer experience then?
No, because that would be really hard to do because it's so entrenched in banks. Almost 100% of customer experience measurement programs will ask, please rate our customer service on a scale of 1 to 5. And that's often the number one metric that gets reported to the C-suite and the board. And that's the metric that is actually misleading the bank because, for example, you might be doing your own customer experience program and you ask your customers on a scale of 1 to 5, how do you rate our customer service? And maybe 80% of them score 4 or 5. So that's great. You can tell the C-suite, hey, 80% of our customers think we're good or great at customer service. And then they feel good about that. But they actually have no idea if that's good or not. Because if all the competitors, the local competitors, are at 65 and you're at 80, then yes, you've got a competitive advantage and you're killing it, keep it up. However, if everyone else is at 90 and you're at 80, you are actually a competitive disadvantage. So you really have to compare.
So kind of begs the question then, what should banks change in their CX tracking programs?
Okay, yeah. I think to fix this, there's really two things you need to do. Number one is you need to get competitive local data to see how you actually compare to competitors locally. And let me emphasize, local. Do not compare yourself to national or regional data. That's not useful. Unless you think that banking in New York City and banking in rural Kansas and banking in suburban Birmingham are all the same and people are all the same, don't do that. Because if you try comparing yourself to national data or even regional data, it's pretty much, you're very much misleading you. So you can't do that. You got to get local competitive data. I'd say the second thing that banks need to do is to drill down into customer service. So it's not enough to just say, how are we doing at customer service, period. You really need to drill down into the different aspects of customer service. Make sure, because there's a lot of different aspects, and make sure that you're not doing really well on the things that are easy and useless. A lot of banks do that. They focus on what they're not doing it intentionally, but they focus on what's easy, what actually doesn't move the needle for customers. Instead, you need to be focusing on things that are more difficult and nuanced that really do lead to customer loyalty over time.
So when it comes to getting that competitive data, let's focus on that point first. Uh, where does that come from? What's the best place to get that?
Okay. Yeah. So as I mentioned, it's internally you get overwhelmingly positive feedback. It's the sort of things where even if you're not doing a customer experience program, you still get some comments on your Facebook or whatever, or just maybe random comments from customers that say, hey, Susie's in the call center is really nice, or Billy's really really good at helping me out with the mobile app when I have a problem. Billy in the branch, something like that. So it can seem like you're really good at customer service, and they probably get high scores for that in their customer service survey. But I could tell you from conducting customer service surveys across, I think it's 5,417 banks and credit union, that everybody gets those same positive scores. So every bank gets really high scores on customer service, which means customer service is actually average. Great customer service isn't necessarily great. So you really have to get competitive scores and do your market research across your own footprint. So I'll give you an example. I've been doing this for many years, and one of the fun things when you do national surveys is you get to slice and dice the data however you want. And so you get to see things like, do you know what the friendliest city is in the United States? It's Nashville. Nashville is the friendliest major market in the United States. Every single bank gets super duper high scores for friendliness. When you ask how friendly people are at Bank A, at Bank B, but also like Restaurant A and Restaurant B, Hotel A, Hotel B, they all get super high scores in Nashville. Why? Because Nashville is a really friendly place and everybody's friendly. So because of that, friendliness does not differentiate at all. So if you're a bank in Nashville and you advertise, move to us because we're really friendly. And actually there have been a few banks that I've seen do that over the years, saying we're friendly because they really are friendly and they're really honest. They looked at their customers and said, wow, our customers say we're really friendly. Let's advertise around that. So they said, hey, move to us. We're the friendliest bank in Nashville. They get no new customers. Zero. Because everybody else in Nashville is saying, I've already got super friendly. That's not my problem. Whereas on the flip side, if you were a bank in, say, New Jersey, which is not known for being friendly, and you said, hey, we really are friendly, maybe you would, attract customers, but it would be hard to do that with the same population, working in your bank as your competitors. Maybe if you bust people in from Nashville, you could do that, but maybe that'd help you to stand out, but I think that'd be difficult. So that's just to say, if everybody's service is really great, everybody's friendliness is really great, it's actually not a strength. You really have to know how to compare to the other banks in your footprint. And you have to do the research and compare your data to theirs.
Gotcha. Totally understand the friendliness front. What about other aspects like the digital experience, for example?
Yeah. For digital, it works the same, but often the reverse. A lot of banks and credit unions think that they're not very good at digital. They think, hey, we're really good at customer service and we're not good at digital. And for the most part, they're right that they are better at the in-person customer service than the digital. But that does not necessarily say what is their strength. It's compared to the other. So if you are, have good customer service, but everybody's got good customer service, that's not going to help. If you've got pretty good digital and everybody else's stinks, then that might be something to focus on. So I'll give you an example. I was working with a bank in the South a few years ago, and started working with them, and they had just earmarked $11 million to upgrade their managed services. A lot of their managed services, like everything except the core conversion. A lot of their digital services, etc. And that was because they knew that their online and mobile banking stunk. They were absolutely sure that we need to replace this. It's terrible. It's not working. And when we started to dig into why did you think that? Why do you think that? Because they had not done large surveys amongst their own customers. They said, "Oh, we always hear that our technology stinks." It turned out a lot of that fed back to exactly one conversation, and that was the chairman of the board's wife had heard criticism from one of her friends at a cocktail party. Oh, I had such trouble with trying to get online with your bank. She tells the chairman. The chairman then says to everybody else on the board and the C-suite, so our technology. I've heard our technology isn't very good. Do we need to switch it? And so that became an echo chamber within the bank. Oh, okay, it's bad. We need to switch. And they had some other comments, but really, you could trace it back to that particular comment. Now, fortunately, before they started to spend that $11 million, we actually did some competitive research for them. So, what do your customers think about your technology? What do your competitors' customers think about their technology? And it turned out that, yeah, their customers weren't super happy with it, but they were actually the best in their market. In a pretty, it's in the South, it's a pretty large market. All of their competitors had really bad technology. They had kind of bad technology, but everybody else was much worse. So actually, although their technology wasn't stupendous, it actually was better than the competitors. And they actually had a competitive advantage in technology. Now, it took them a couple of months to sort of accept the data. We said, hey, look, you know what? This isn't just one person. This is thousands of people across your footprint saying this is what they think of your technology and competitors' technology. So it took them a while to absorb that and to change their mind and say, wow, I guess we do have a competitive advantage. So what they did was, instead of spending $11 million upgrading their technology, they instead earmarked $1 million marketing around their current technology. And so they started promoting, hey, are you frustrated with the technology of your bank? Move to us, it's better. Move to us, it's better. We've got better technology than your current bank. And they ended up gaining significant market share from that $1 million marketing spend. And they saved $10 million in having to upgrade their managed services. So, I mean, there's another example about how, the customer experience folks at that bank were superstars because they'd saved $10 million and increased their market share. So that's another way you can make your customer experience program a revenue generator instead of a cost.
Love that. Yeah, it's definitely not uncommon for people to over rotate on anecdotal evidence, and it's not uncommon for people to over rotate on NPS score, sort of that
Yeah,
overall customer service metric. But I think a lot of the value is actually double clicking and going deeper into those
yeah,
components that make up customer service.
exactly.
What's the best way to approach that?
Well, you really have to get the collect the experience at the competitive experience at the local level, and you want to work with somebody like a Qualtrics and Red Pepper to be able to get a survey not just of your own customers, but in the market of competitive customers, and you can do that in some blind studies and compare apples to apples. Um, I don't suggest trying to do that yourself for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's a lot more expensive to try to do it yourself. So that's why you want to work with an expert who's done this before. And I've seen a lot of banks sort of try to do it themselves, sort of in a vacuum, that end up with data that just, you look at the data and say, this is useless. And I appreciate that you tried to do this, but you look at the data and say, you really can't make any conclusions from this. So you really need to work with an expert who can do it cheaper and has done it right.
So, how does the person running a CX program convince the bank to focus on those nuances instead of being stuck on those overall key metrics?
All right. Yeah. Well, that's actually easier than you might think. And it's all about showing the value. First of all, you can calculate it with a customer lifetime value. If your bank hasn't done this, you really need to do this. Maybe you've calculated it before, maybe you haven't. Customer lifetime value is the amount of profit you're going to make from a customer over their lifetime. So, for instance, in the Northeast, the average customer lifetime value is $3,852. So, your average household over their tenure with the bank, that's how much profit you're going to make. Okay, and a small business is maybe about $12,000, a little bit more than $12,000. So, in order to calculate what is the benefit, the cost benefit of the program, you can do a simple calculation. Say, hey, if we have a good customer experience program and we measure the right things, if we can save just 1% of our customers from leaving, you can just do the math on that. And that's a pretty low bar. If we understand our customers, are we going to reduce attrition by 1%? Yeah, you could do that in your sleep. So that's a very low bar, but you can do the calculation. So let's say, for instance, if you have 40,000 customers, you can say, gosh, our customer experience program, if we just barely just do the bare minimum, we save 1% of our customers, that's $1.5 million to the bottom line. There you go, bingo. You are now contributing $1.5 million to the bottom line of the company. So you've all of a sudden gone from a cost to a revenue generator, and you're a star of the bank. And that's what really makes the difference between a good customer experience measurement program and a bad one, is put the value on that. Let people know what the value is on it, objectively calculate the value on it, and let them see, wow, we really should be pumping more money into customer experience programs. And because these folks who run the program, they really know what they're doing, and they're making us money.
Man, that's great news for people running sales programs at banks. Hopefully, that'll increase their impact on the bank in which they work, and hopefully result in a bonus as well. Do you have some other examples of better ways to ask questions in a CX program?
Sure. There's a few others. Let's talk about fees. So everybody will ask about fees. How satisfied are you with the fees? And that's the wrong question to ask. Um, because if you say, hey, do you want to pay a fee? Yes or no? Of course, the answer is going to be no. So what you need to do is you need to ask, rate your value for fees. What is the value that you get? How happy are you with the value that you get? Because having done this across many, many different banks, um, a lot. There's been situations where I've actually advised banks don't lower your fees, and that's because the customers themselves will say, "Hey, I'm getting great values for the fees." You're always going to get complaints about the fees. Just to be clear, the two most common complaints that you're going to get from your customers, and this is true for every institution, are fees and technology. Oh, didn't like paying that overdraft fee or the monthly checking fee or something like that. You're going to get complaints about that. Do people then leave because of that? Not very much. The other thing that people complain about is technology. So, I can't do this on the mobile app. I can't do that on the online tools. So they're going to complain about that. But back to fees. So you got to keep in mind that you can charge your customers $1 million a month. You can do that. And they'll be happy to pay it if they are getting $2 million a month in value. So it's all about the value. It's not about the amount of fees. Because on the other hand, if you give them no value and charge them $1 a month, they're going to think you're overcharging and they're going to be unhappy. So that might lead them to be less happy, less loyal, and more likely to leave. So it's not about the fees, it's about the value provided. Let me give you an example. I was working with a credit union that they'd gotten a few complaints about their fees, through social media or word of mouth and stuff like that. But luckily, they're doing a customer experience program, and they asked their members, not the customers, I guess a member experience program, how happy are you with the value for the fees we charge? And their members were extremely happy. They were like one of the best in their market. Um, and so not only did they not reduce their fees, okay, wow, okay, we've gotten a few complaints, but we're not going to reduce our fees because, over 95% were really happy with the value for our fees. So we knew that those were really extreme outliers. So not only did they not reduce their fees, but they also tightened up some of their forgiveness protocols to stop forgiving so many fees. And over time, that had zero impact on their on their member loyalty. And then we did a calculation that saved them $1 million a year. So they were about to give money back to their members that they didn't need to give back. And they changed that and were able to make $1 million a year just because of their customer experience or member experience program in this case. Told them what was the reality instead of going by a bunch of anecdotes. And I tell you what, if you can take that kind of data, that kind of unambiguously accurate customer data, and show it to the CEO and the CFO, hey, we don't need to lower our fees. We don't need to spend on this. And here's $1 million to the bottom line. You know what? The CFO and the CEO are going to want to kiss you or at least give you a big bonus.
Yeah, we see the same thing here. I mean, people don't really doubt the price tag when you can demonstrate the value. Any other good questions that you should be asking in the CX program?
Um, sure. One of the things that really gets overlooked a lot is staff training. And yes, you can ask your customers how well trained your staff are because they have opinions about that and they see that. So one of the things you should be asking your customers is how well trained are the staff members, because they can see, hey, if the teller can answer my question and needs to refer it to the branch manager, I don't think that staff member is very well trained. Same in the call center, um, and that way you can ensure that your staff is getting trained well. Because if they aren't trained well, then they can't answer the questions. They get passed around. You get a little bit of the runaround. You might get the wrong answer. So that's something that you need to be asking. Just one side note on that. Although getting the runaround is a no-no, you should be asking about whether you get the runaround, because sometimes that's related to staff training. Although that's a no-no, you really don't want to pass your customers around, but it's not as bad as getting a wrong answer. So if they say, I get the runaround, and your staff isn't very well trained, but in the end you're helping me, then that's okay, because that means it's just a staff training issue. You'd much rather have that untrained staff member say, I don't know, let me wait for let me give you an answer when I can talk to the assistant branch manager or something like that. You do not want your new staff saying, well, I think it's this. You do not want to give them a wrong answer. So That's a bit of a no-no there. And so getting passed around and getting a little bit of the rundown is actually okay in that. Um, and there's a little bit that has surprised me based on some meta-analysis. I thought I'd share this with you. Across millions of customers, it's about first call resolution. I know that's a big deal in a lot of banks. Did we answer your call or solve your problem on your first call? And hey, that's not just in banking, that's in a lot of industries, and it's been around for decades and decades and decades. Oh, we've got to solve it in the first call. Got to solve it in the first contact. And that's actually not true. And that's based on again, millions of interviews. We have correlated if you don't solve their problem or answer their question on the first call, they're not happy, but it doesn't affect loyalty. They give you a little bit of a pass. If you don't solve it on the second one, that's when it starts to affect loyalty, and people might think about leaving the institution. I'm not saying you shouldn't try to solve it the first time, but it's not really the be all end all that I've seen it before in some customer experience programs. You really want to solve the issue. Most importantly, is you solve it correctly. If it takes two contacts, generally customers are okay with that. And again, this is based on millions of interviews, so this isn't my opinion, but that's their opinion. If it takes 3 times, that's when you've got a real issue. So that's why I love this work. Is that I have these notions. I grew up in the business and said, okay, first call resolution is really important, really important. And then we took a look at that and said it's not nearly as important as we've been telling ourselves for decades. It's not unimportant, but really you got to do it before the third. So first call, first point or second point resolution.
A lot of our clients want to measure customer experience with their digital tools, like their mobile app or through online banking. Can you provide some tips about measuring that?
Sure. Yeah, every bank credit union is going to want to ask about their digital tools. They want to ask how easy is it to use the mobile app? What are the quality of the online tools? What's their experience with ATMs, et cetera? But one thing that I see that a lot of banks and credit unions miss is they actually miss their number one digital asset. And what your number one digital asset is? It's your staff. That's the differentiator. Believe it or not, based upon, again, a gazillion interviews, we know that satisfaction with your digital tools is much more aligned with how well your staff knows how to use those tools. It's not the tools themselves. And I know that might seem strange because we think, oh, well, Chase has great tools. We don't have good tools. So that's what makes them different. There's actually not a lot of differentiation. Over the past decade and a half, we've seen a real big change within banking. It used to be that the big banks, the ones who had online banking, were rated much, much differently than everyone else because they had online banking. Digital. And everybody else starts to get digital tools. And year by year by year, actually month by month by month, we can see the divide closing and closing and closing. And now there's almost no difference in satisfaction between the little guys and the big guys. I know that doesn't sound maybe logical to you, but it really is. The customers now, the satisfaction levels with technology at the smaller institutions are almost the same as the big institutions. There's still some differentiation, but not as much. It used to be infinite. Now it's a few percentage points. I know that it might be hard to wrap your head around that within the banking industry, because I know almost every small bank and credit union actually every bank thinks, okay, we've got to improve our digital tools. We're not keeping up with the Joneses, with the Chases, with the Bank of Americas. We really need to improve our digital tools. Everyone's telling us that we're falling behind. Well, think about who is it that's telling you that. Your customers are complaining a little bit, but they're not complaining enough to leave. It's companies that want to sell you new digital tools. They're the ones who are saying, oh, you're behind. You need to catch up, and you need to pay me to help you to do that. But customers really aren't saying that. They're complaining about the digital tools, but they're not complaining. They're not saying that it's enough to switch because they feel like, I can't figure it out here at my credit union. I'm not going to switch to Chase because I don't think they'll have better tools, and I'll just have to figure it out there. So anyway, there's not that big of a difference. But what we see the huge difference is training. When we take a look at 2 community banks or 2 regional banks or 2 super regional banks that have the exact same technology, they can get rated really, really differently by their customers because one of them trains their staff really well, and one of them doesn't. So when somebody walks into the branch and says, "I need some help with the online tools or the digital tools," um, if they don't get help with that, or nobody in the branch knows how to help them, they say, "Oh, you're gonna have to call the call center." That makes the bank look really bad. Um, and by the way, this holds true for all your staff. Just to tell you something that we've seen in the data, in the customer experience data over the last few years, it used to be that a lot of banks and credit unions would have maybe one expert in the branch. Billy's really good at helping. Billy's a millennial or maybe even Gen Z, um, probably millennial. Um, and he's really good at the tools. So if I have a question, he can answer that. Maybe Susie in the call center is really good at answering my questions with the tools. And people were happy about that. They gave Billy or Susie really high ratings. Over the last few years, especially through the pandemic, we've seen it change. Instead of, "Hey, Billy's really good, Susie's really good," you start to get a lot more comments about, "I walked into the branch, I had a question about the digital technology, and there's a line to see Billy, and the other tellers are all twiddling their thumbs. Why is Billy the only one that can answer these digital questions? Why is Susie the only one who can answer these questions when I call in?" And it's changed from a positive to now a negative to have all of that knowledge just focused in one person. So you really need to make sure that everybody is savvy about the tools, because if they're not savvy about the tools, then they're not going to be able to help your customers, and your customers are going to feel like the tools aren't very good. So I know what a lot of banks are going to say. "Oh, you know what? We can't train all of our staff on the tools. We've been trying for years, but our older bankers, they're just not that digitally savvy, and they just can't figure it out. They're really good bankers, but they can't figure it out. We can't rely on them to do that." Or, more senior people or something like that. And I know everybody sort of pushes back. "Well, you know what? It's different here." I hear this. "Bruce, it's different at our bank. We've got some older bankers that they're just not going to get the digital technology." And I have to push back and say, "Hey, if one bank can do it, another bank can do it." So I'll give you an example. I was working with a bank in New Jersey a couple of years ago, and they had the same excuse. They said, "Well, you know what? We can't get all of our staff to use the digital tools because we've got some older ones." Um, and so what they did was, I think, quite clever. They said, "Okay, everybody, you don't have to learn to use the digital tools, but guess what? This year, we're going to pay our bonuses through Zelle. If you want your bonus, you, number one, have to go and open a bank account at the bank you work at." A lot of them hadn't. "And you have to do it online. You have to open that account online. You have to sign up for Zelle, and you claim your money. But you don't have to. We are not forcing you to do this. But if you want your bonus, that's where it's at." And so that's what they did. 100% pay through Zelle. And guess what? All of a sudden, all of their frontline staff knew how to use the digital technology. Surprise, surprise. And if you've ever been around somebody who's using it for the first time, what's the comment that you always hear when somebody sets it up or does it for the first time? They go, "Oh, that was easier than I thought." So, and here's the thing that I really love. So they did that, and 100% of their folks signed up online for banking, signed up for Zelle, got their money, figured that all out. That was all they did. They didn't offer any training. They just did that. Within 4 months, their customers started rating their technology higher. They had not changed their technology. They hadn't done anything. Just all of a sudden, their staff knew how to use the technology, were more enthusiastic about sharing that with their customers, and the customers saw a big difference within 4 months. So I love that example about being able to track how well your staff knows how to use the technology can have a huge impact, much more so than the digital tools themselves.
Yeah, love that story as well. So let's talk about trust. How important is measuring trust in your customer experience program?
Trust can be very important, but you really have to keep it in perspective. No bank will ever be rated completely trustworthy by all of its customers. And that's just the nature of the beast, that some people don't trust the banking system. It's nothing to take personally. And some people don't trust anything. They're just not trusting people. And so they're not going to rate you 100% trustworthy. So banks generally don't get 100% trustworthy unless for some reason you're only surveying your very happiest customers, and all of them will say you're trustworthy. But you don't want that sample bias. Um, and this is especially true when you have headlines like the bank failures recently, or anytime you have a CEO, a bank CEO caught doing something bad. The trust tends to dip for everybody for a while. I saw a recent Morning Consult poll that said 1 in 5 Americans did not think that their money was safe in their bank, and they're wrong. We know that the FDIC covers 100%, not just 80% of people, um, and that they should trust the banking system. And I know 1 in 4 of them said, "Oh, the banking system is not as safe as other industries." We know the banking system is really safe. There are so many safeguards. Everybody who is seeing this is thinking, "Oh my gosh, we have to deal with so much regulatory pressure, and we're under such scrutiny all the time." We know that banking, it just doesn't get any safer than banking. Even when a bank goes out of business, 0% of their customers generally lose money, as has happened recently. So, but having said that, 1 in 4 Americans just don't think it's as strong as the other industry. So that might not seem like a lot, but when we know that it should be 100%, that is a bit. So we know it's safer, but you still have to deal with that perception gap. So right now, I would definitely be tracking trust, but don't overreact to it. Don't say, "Oh my gosh, we're only down to 87% trustworthy." Everybody has dipped recently, and so that tends to follow more sort of headlines than it does bank behavior.